I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him.
In the 1960s, the U.S. was in the Vietnam War. This war split the nation. By July 1969, when Apollo 11 flew to the moon, only 39% of Americans were for the war. NASA's Apollo program gave hope and took minds off the war and other big problems. The Apollo program was developed during the Cold War. Imagine you and a friend are in a big competition to build the tallest tower out of blocks. Instead of knocking over the other tower, you just keep building yours bigger. You also try to get other friends to join your team, saying your way of building is better. The US and the Soviet Union didn't fight each other directly in a war with soldiers and battles. Instead, we're always trying to show that their way was the best way. They did this by building lots of powerful weapons, and both of them went into space. They both tried to get other countries to agree with their ideas. The United States was a democracy and promoted capitalism. The Soviet Union promoted communism. Both sides wanted to show that their way of running a country was the best way. This competition went on for many years. People were often worried that it might turn into a real war, but thankfully, it never did. Eventually, the Soviet Union broke apart and the Cold War ended. So it was like a big, long competition without an actual fighting war. One of the reasons why America went to the moon in the first place was out of fear. Fear was that the Soviet Union would use the moon as a military base. The Soviets were also afraid that the United States would do the same thing. Countries now have agreements called treaties to keep the moon a peaceful place. The first moon landing was huge news. About 93% of all televisions in the United States showed Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. This event was big for science and brought people together. But by Apollo 17, people were less interested. NASA did not even take a TV camera with them to show the landing. The moon trips had become normal, and people were less excited about them. The Apollo program was more than just space trips. A sign of great science and bravery. The last trip to the moon was Apollo 17 in December 1972. Harrison Smith was on this trip. He was the only scientist to walk on the moon. The others were test pilots. Some think the moon trips were just a short part of history, with the last time being in 1972. And the U.S. has not even sent a robot to the moon since the 1960s with the Surveyor. But there is more to this story. Other countries have gone to the moon. The Soviet Union's lunar program went several times, including in 1970 when Luna 16 became the first robot or unmanned lander to bring home moon rocks just like the Apollo astronauts. China, India, and Japan have all landed their own unmanned landers or robots on the moon as well. China completed the first soft landing on the far side of the moon by Chang'e 4 in 2019. Chang'e 5 returned back to the Earth with its own moon rocks in 2020. India has the Chandrayaan program. India became the first country to land on the moon's south pole in 2023. Japan successfully landed on the moon with their own robot in 2024. In the United States, Congress has changed focus. People didn't want to watch moonwalks anymore, and the Soviets didn't land on the moon. Congress needed votes, but people didn't give support for the moon project. Instead, Congress chose projects like Skylab, the Space Shuttle, and the International Space Station. This change was for a bigger view of space trips, just not to the moon. When the Cold War ended in 1991, there was even less focus on a moon mission. The U.S. did the Apollo trips. And after the Cold War ended, people made private space companies. SpaceX is the best known. SpaceX is the first private company to send astronauts into outer space. Other space companies include United Launch Alliance, Arianespace, Virgin Galaxy, and Blue Origin. Astrobotic Technology tried with its Peregrine robot to become the first private company to land on the moon. A fuel leak stopped it, but it shows that companies are able to launch their own